Welcome to Witham Sounding Board, a podcast sharing powerful business tips, insights, and trends for those seeking to become a rock star in their industry.
We are back at it again for yet another episode of Hot Topics in the Multi-Employer World. I'm your host, Aaron Slaughter, and today we have two guests from our System and Process Assurance Department. We have Stephanie Fitzgerald, who's a partner, and we have David Haley, who's the lead consultant. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
So let's get right into it, because today's episode is about the importance of streamlining your internal processes. And when I think about streamlining, to me, that starts with not just a good, but a great internal control system. Can you speak at all about just the importance of internal controls and what internal control is and why that's important?
Really great question. Internal controls are very simply put, they're the rules, procedures, mechanisms that a company uses to ensure the integrity of their information, prevent fraud, promote accountability.
Excellent. I agree all with that. And just as you know, I'm an auditor. So as I think about just doing my audits and my almost 14 years of doing this job, we harp on controls. We test internal controls. And at one point in time, a partner that hired me told me that if you don't understand a client's internal controls, how can you possibly test what they have at their organization? So
I would agree with that.
I think sometimes, Aaron, that the internal controls sort of get pushed to the side, for lack of a better term, right? When it comes to financial accounting and reporting, most finance departments kind of, you're in on the numbers, and the internal controls surrounding those processes are sort of noise to some people, right? But at the end of the day, I think what's really important about the internal controls is what David just said before. Those internal controls will help prevent fraud. They will help your operating efficiency when you have proper internal controls in place. And, when all is said and done, that really does help your financial reporting. The completeness and the accuracy of the financial reporting really a lot of the time depends on those internal controls that you have in place surrounding those financial procedures and other departments outside of finance.
That's a great point. And when I think about if I'm a listener and I'm tasked with running an organization, or if I'm in charge as far as management, and the reporting piece is huge, because I need to know the accuracy of my data is going to be what I need it to be. And that starts and ends with internal controls. And then the other point you brought up about fraud, there was a gentleman named Donald Cressy who came up with the fraud triangle. And what he found was environments that don't have good internal controls are ripe for fraud. So this is exactly what I would expect to hear.
And Aaron, to piggyback off of what you and Stephanie have commented, think about it on the flip side, that having that good structure for controls can also maximize the time that you spend doing more important and higher risk areas, because you're able to pass off the lower risk areas and maybe automate it or bring in some type of AI here with that to be able to help there with it. And you're focusing on the bigger picture, the higher risk.
Another great point. In our world, time is money. So yes. I love saving people money.
I think actually that's a really good point that David brings up too when discussing internal controls. Risk really comes into play a lot, right? As auditors, we discuss risk a lot. And that really plays into the internal control, right? If you're looking at a lower risk area, you may not need to have as many controls in place surrounding that area. So you really can focus your time and your efforts in the areas of higher risk, right? So those are the areas that you would really want to have very tight internal controls surrounding.
So we just spent some time talking about what an internal control is and why having a great internal control system is important. I know a lot of people think they have internal controls, but do they actually have them? Can you speak at all to what that looks like from your world?
Sure. This is actually a great question, because this happens more often than not, surprisingly. In a lot of the smaller organizations that we come into, and I'm going to use the term less sophisticated, and I don't mean that in terms of the actual company or the people are less sophisticated. It's just their system of internal control is less sophisticated. When we come in, a lot of times what we're given is, here are our procedures, right? This is what we do every day. And a lot of times the employees there, or even management, think that those are internal controls, right? Internal controls are just magically embedded in those procedures. But more often than not, what it is they're just that. They're just procedures. They're just someone's day-to-day that they're following, but they're not necessarily a formalized internal control system. And what I mean by that is it could be something that you do, but you're not doing it 100% of the time. And with something like an internal control, you have to be doing something 100% of the time. Also, a lot of people think that maybe preparing something is an internal control. Well, we prepare that. Well, right. But is there a second set of eyes that's reviewing that prior to something being entered into your general ledger system per se? That's really the internal control piece of it, right? That there's a second set of eyes that's reviewing something that a preparer is performing. So I think that that's a common misconception among a lot of individuals and a lot of management in smaller companies.
I could not agree more with you. And I'll be candid because we struggle with that sometimes as auditors when we're thinking about our approach, when we're going through our game plan of how we're going to test not just controls, but doing walkthroughs and ultimately getting to the actual substantive piece. We go back and forth between, are we actually testing a control or are we just reperforming a procedure? So those are very, very valid points you just made.
And just to be able to piggyback off of Stephanie here, like, ask yourself, well, what happens when this person takes a vacation or when this person is going to be out on an extended leave? You know, what happens? Who's going to be able to pick that piece up? You know, because you want to distribute those responsibilities to different people to reduce the risk of inappropriate action, you know, separating authorization and custody and record keeping among various people to cut down on that fraud. You know, yes, it's great that you may be preparing something, but if you're reviewing it, you know, are you looking at everything? Or are you looking to make sure that it's accurate? Are you signing off on it? Like, what does that review actually look like for you? And those are the things that, you know, you want to start thinking about with it. And I think this can play into, you know, some growth opportunity here. Well, what happens when the department expands? Then what comes up?
Yeah, I think that growth is actually a really big item here, right? So you've got a lot of companies that maybe started out as a smaller company, maybe, you know, on the union side, they didn't have as many members, and all of a sudden membership has doubled, right? So now you've got these procedures in place that at one point they worked for the size of your company, for the size of your members. But then what happens is you almost outgrow yourselves, right? So now you're trying to do processes maybe manually that can be automated if you decide that you want to get into a new general ledger system or something like that can really do more for you and that has more automated internal controls within the system to cut down on that manual human error that can occur.
And I think the way to look at this, and a great question to ask is, you know, why are we doing it this way? You know, challenge that notion of just because we've been doing it for so long, maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe there's a different way of looking at the piece of the puzzle, to be able to have some practices around it where we can say, you know what, this is actually the control that we're going to be doing. Do we really need to be doing this every single day, or can we maybe do it once a month and still have comfort over it?
And sometimes that takes a third party to come in and kind of take a look, you know, take a 10,000 foot view of your policies, procedures, your systems, and things like that. I know it's kind of hard sometimes when you're in a day-to-day position and you're doing the same thing every day. And maybe you've been doing the same thing every day for 10 years and it works for you, but you don't necessarily know or realize that things could be done a little bit better. They could be automated. They could be operating more efficiently. And it may take someone, you know, like a third party to come in and help you streamline those policies, procedures, and internal controls.
I think that's a good point. It's a great point. I think that the lowest hanging fruit is to talk to your auditors because they're in the weeds of your controls. But if you got nobody else, you can absolutely call us because I know that's what we do. And we can spend some time taking a look at your internal controls and your systems.
Absolutely.
We're always here to help.
So now that we know what an internal control is and we know why they're important and how to assess your internal control systems, let's get into the nitty-gritty of it because we are here today to talk about why streamlining your processes are important, why that whole process is vital to your organization. Can you share some examples of some success stories from streamlining?
Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. And I think this is a great question and one that we get asked quite a bit here, right? So we recently had a client. They were a small union counsel, I think like 20 to 30 employees. And this kind of goes back to our point before, just because you've done it for, 5, 10 years, 15 years doesn't mean you have to do it the same way. But, depreciation with your fixed assets is a really big topic, right? So this labor council just happened to be month over month taking an Excel workbook and calculating out depreciation on a very manual basis. It was taking a lot of time to be able to do it. Well, we were able to come in and say, hey, you know what? You have this general ledger system. We can spend some time helping you, input your fixed assets into the system, helping you to understand this. And now all you have to do is on a single month is run this report, and it's going to calculate the depreciation that you need to record monthly. And by doing that, we were able to save them quite a few hours here, and they were able to move on to that higher risk as we were talking about earlier here with it.
I think another point to add to that, depreciation tends to be, and fixed assets in general, tend to be a very easy place to go in and streamline internal controls, like David said, to add a module that just does it on its own. Another thing to think about when it comes to this process is not only saving time, but also the accuracy of your financial reporting. A lot of times what happens in those manual workbooks, and I've seen this several times, assets may become over depreciated, right? And no one ever notices that a specific asset whose depreciation was supposed to stop, 5 years ago, we're still showing it as being depreciated. So obviously that's going to create inaccurate reporting at the end of the day. And it may seem small, right? But if that's happening over several assets, it could come out to be a large number, and nobody wants that inaccuracy in their reporting and somewhere that it doesn't have to occur.
Or think about all the formulas that you're going to have to use, and what happens if you, put in a comma instead of a period, or you miss something, then it throws everything off.
Absolutely. So I think, again, to use Aaron's term, I think that's a low-hanging fruit area. That's something that's very easy to automate, no matter the size of your company. I'm just going to roll right into actually a larger example, an example of a company who I was kind of chatting before, companies that have come into high growth in a short period of time, right? So didn't necessarily have the time to say, okay, in the next 3 years, we're forecasting that we're going to grow, exponentially. So let's start implementing processes. That doesn't necessarily happen, right? I think that doesn't happen in most companies. It's sort of like, we're a little more reactive, right? When it comes to growth. We had a company that had grown so fast that all of a sudden the functions that they were performing in the finance department were becoming way too much to handle. All the manual procedures, they really couldn't get their job done on a daily basis in this finance department. And what was happening is they were sort of creating fixes to these things, but in a silo, right? Like, here's one problem, here's my fix. Here's my next problem, here's my fix. But what wasn't happening is on a larger scale, they weren't looking at the big picture and saying, will all of these fixes work together at the end of the day? Because what happens is we're going to implement, and they were implementing actually a bunch of different automated systems, a bunch of different third-party products. And at the end of the day, those products weren't talking to each other. So what was happening is you were taking manual issues and you were really just making them automated issues. Because at the end of the day, you had information sitting in 5 different systems and there was no center point of those systems, right? So you were doing things in one area, doing them in another area 5 times over. You were repeating documentation, you were repeating approvals, you were repeating sign-offs, things like that. So they thought that they were, improving their operating efficiency, but at the end, it made it a little bit less efficient. So we kind of came in and we had a discussion at a higher level and basically said, okay, here's your center unit, right? Here's your main GL operating system. If you decide that you have an issue, what needs to happen is we need to look at systems and we need to make sure that they will talk to that main operating system, right? You need to make sure that your IT stack is all talking to each other. Because at the end of the day, if not, there's no reason to have those products. There are other products in the industry. There are probably other modules within the main product that you're using that would make everything much more streamlined. So at the end of the day, that's what happened. We kind of came in, took a large look at everything, and were able to streamline everything and use pieces of a module that they were already paying for that could actually fix the problems that they were having within their department and within other departments, right? So things weren't as siloed as they were at first. So looking at the big picture is really important too.
And it almost reminds me, as you bring up that example, Stephanie, of like the Band-Aid approach, right? I'm just taking a Band-Aid. I'm going to implement a new system and it's going to fix it. But you're not actually fixing the root cause of the problem to begin with. And I think that's where it's important when you want to talk about streamlining processes and the low-hanging fruits, is also to look at, is this going to fix the root cause of our issue? Is this going to give us the time that we need with it?
Agreed.
Wonderful. So if I'm someone listening, if I'm tasked with management, if I'm a trustee, if I'm anyone who's interested in what we've been talking about today, and I gave Witham a call, what does the process look like from that first initial meet and greet to essentially hearing what I can do to help streamline my business and the process?
Sure. So after the initial meet and greet, where we kind of come up with exactly what you guys are looking for, the scope of the project that you're looking for, the first thing we would do is set up some meetings with management and with some individual process owners. And when I say process owners, the people that are actually performing the procedures or performing the internal controls related to certain functions. So we would set up, we like to try to keep the meetings a little bit short, right? We don't want to go overboard. So we'll start out with little 1-hour meetings with specific process owners and just kind of chat about your day to day. Go through your process from start to finish. And it's really just more conversational. Just tell us what you do. We always like to say, show us where the bodies are buried, right? Show us everything. Tell us everything. Because what we're here to do is we're here to help. We're here to consult, right? We'll kind of chat about things. And as we're hearing what you're doing, we're taking down notes, because there may be controls that you're performing that you don't even know are internal controls, or there may be, gaps that we find within certain functions of your organization where we say, okay, best practices. We've looked at a million companies' internal controls, and in your specific industry, we've seen some best practices, things that really work for companies, and we'll kind of come up with some recommendations surrounding those areas and just give those to you at the end of the day. But really start to finish is these small meetings, which create a system of internal control that we can document, as well as gaps that we will provide to you and possible remediations for those gaps.
I think there's some great points that Stephanie brought up. And the one thing that really hits home is, show us where the bodies are buried, right? So we really want to be able to help. And we really want to be able to help the client improve their processes and to be able to understand it, right? So it's a positive thing when we come in with things. And sometimes, in these little 1-hour meetings, we're looking for other things. Maybe we do a little bit of a deeper dive because we see something or we know something a little bit more there with it. But really, we just want to understand the whole process. Just, tell us everything right from the get-go, and, we'll kind of work through it. It's a very collaborative approach that we're taking. There's no right or wrong thing to be able to tell us with this.
Sounds good to me. It sounds like it's valuable and helpful, and it's something that I see people being able to participate in it and not be this, I got to take my operations offline for several days or weeks or whatever have you. It's something that we can get in and help and do remotely and get the results in front of the people who matter and make the decisions.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So if I just heard all of that, and I'm looking in my pockets, I'm looking at my bank accounts, I'm looking at expense approvals, how much does something like this cost? Is it expensive? Is it inexpensive? Can you speak it all to that?
Yeah, sure. I think the best part of this, Aaron, is that there really is no one size fits all approach, right? We can pretty much make this and fit this to however you see fit, however the company sees fit. If you don't really have a ton of money to spend on this, but you really want to look at specific systems, like David kind of alluded to before, risk may come into play, right? You may say, what we really want to look at this year, what seems to be our biggest risk area is, our revenue function. So you can say, this year we want to do revenue. Next year we want to look at another system of internal controls, a different function. And we can kind of do it that way and break it up that way. Or you can have a company that says, I want everything revamped right now. I want you guys to come in right now. And in, 6 months, I want to have everything documented. I want to have good policies and procedures in place. I want to have internal controls in place. Then we can do that as well, right? So I think that's kind of what to focus on, is just there is no one size fits all. We can doctor it and make it whatever you really need it to be.
Right. And I definitely think that that's great. And it's $1 million question of how much something like this costs. Some of our smaller clients, for example, their auditors, wrote them up for some deficiencies, and they only, to Stephanie's point, one size doesn't fit all. So in those cases, those clients just wanted to have us look at the deficiencies and say, how can I improve just on these deficiencies, and how can I streamline the process here with it before moving on to larger areas? We're here for this conversation and to help customize something that works for you and your team.
Yeah. So I think the important thing is no company is too big, no company is too small, and no system of internal control is too sophisticated or not sophisticated enough. We're here to help.
I love it. I love it. Those situations where we can always come in and help. So what I'm hearing is that this is affordable, which is exactly what I was hoping to hear. Listen, if you're out there and you're interested in what you heard today, you like what you heard today, go ahead and check out our website for the systems and process assurance page. We've got some one-pagers on there, just some information for how you can get in contact with us at Witham, and we can come in and help you out. We want to say thank you to our guests today, both to Stephanie and to David, for spending some time with us. We appreciate you. That's very valuable information. For all the listeners out there, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that one. See you next time for more hot topics in the multi-employer world. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you'll be first in line to hear what's coming next. Don't want to wait for our next episode? Check us out at witham.com. That's WITHUM.com.